Question 1. Implementation of a comprehensive vulnerability scanning strategy within Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11. X for a newly deployed enterprise environment, considering the need to balance security coverage with system performance and alert management. Option A. Disable vulnerability scanning for all assets categorized as non-critical to reduce the initial workload and focus only on high-priority systems. Option B. Begin by scheduling vulnerability scans for critical assets only, with a moderate frequency, and then incrementally expand the scope and adjust frequency based on observed system performance and the security team's capacity to manage alerts. Option C. Initiate a full network scan with the most aggressive frequency settings immediately upon deployment, and then address any performance issues or alert overload as they arise. Option D. Schedule scans for all network assets exclusively during the lowest anticipated network traffic periods, assuming this will mitigate any performance concerns. The correct answer is C. Initiate a full network scan with the most aggressive frequency settings immediately upon deployment, and then address any performance issues or alert overload as they arise. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT security administration, balancing the need for comprehensive security monitoring with the practical limitations of system resources and the potential for alert fatigue. The administrator must make a critical decision about the scope and frequency of vulnerability scanning within Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS. 11. X. Overly aggressive scanning can degrade system performance and generate an unmanageable volume of alerts, while insufficient scanning leaves the organization exposed to undetected threats. The professional challenge lies in selecting a scanning strategy that is both effective in identifying vulnerabilities and sustainable within the operational environment, while also adhering to compliance requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased implementation of vulnerability scanning, starting with a baseline scan of critical assets, and then gradually expanding the scope and frequency based on observed system impact and the organization's risk tolerance. This aligns with best practices for security management, which emphasize a risk-based approach. By prioritizing critical assets, the administrator ensures that the most sensitive areas of the network are monitored first. Monitoring system performance and alert volume allows for informed adjustments to the scanning schedule and scope, preventing resource exhaustion and alert fatigue. This iterative process ensures that the scanning strategy is optimized for effectiveness and efficiency, thereby supporting the organization's security posture and compliance objectives without causing undue operational disruption. This approach is consistent with the principles of responsible system administration and proactive security management, which are implicitly expected under general IT governance frameworks that Symantec CCS operates within. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing a full network scan with maximum frequency immediately upon deployment of CCS is a regulatory and ethical failure. This approach ignores the potential for significant performance degradation on production systems, which could impact business operations and potentially violate service-level agreements or even regulatory requirements related to system availability. It also risks overwhelming the security team with a deluge of alerts, leading to missed critical vulnerabilities and a breakdown in the incident response process. This is a failure of due diligence and responsible risk management. Scheduling scans only during off-peak hours without considering the actual resource utilization during those times is also problematic. While the intention is to minimize impact, off-peak can still be a period of high activity for certain critical systems. Without monitoring and analysis, this approach might lead to missed vulnerabilities if scans are incomplete or if critical systems are still experiencing performance issues. It also fails to proactively adapt the schedule based on real-time system load, which is a hallmark of effective security administration. Disabling vulnerability scanning for non-critical assets to reduce the immediate workload is a significant security and compliance oversight. While prioritizing critical assets is important, non-critical assets can still be entry points for attackers to pivot to more sensitive systems. Comprehensive security strategy requires a holistic view of the attack surface. Failing to scan these assets leaves potential vulnerabilities unaddressed, increasing the overall risk to the organization and potentially violating compliance mandates that require a thorough assessment of all IT assets. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach the implementation of vulnerability scanning by first understanding the organization's critical assets and risk appetite. This involves consulting with IT operations and business stakeholders to identify systems that are essential for business continuity and those that handle sensitive data. Next, a phased deployment strategy should be adopted, starting with a limited scope and frequency on non-production or less critical systems to establish a baseline for performance impact and alert volume. This initial phase should include robust monitoring of system resources and the security team's capacity to handle alerts. Based on the data gathered, the scanning strategy can be iteratively refined, gradually increasing the scope and frequency as confidence in the system's stability and the team's ability to manage alerts grows. This data-driven, iterative approach ensures that the vulnerability management program is both effective and sustainable, minimizing disruption while maximizing security coverage. Question 2. The risk matrix shows a critical vulnerability related to unauthorized access to sensitive data with a high likelihood and high impact. As the Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11, ex-administrator for a U.S.-based financial institution, which of the following actions best aligns with regulatory requirements and best practices for managing this risk within the CCS framework? Option A. Create a new compliance standard in Symantec CCS 11. X that broadly addresses data security without specifically targeting the identified vulnerability, assuming this will satisfy general regulatory oversight. Option B. Escalate the issue to senior management and recommend a complete overhaul of the data access control system, deferring any immediate remediation until a new system is procured. Option C. Manually implement a security patch on all affected servers and document the process in a separate spreadsheet, as CCS reporting for this specific vulnerability is known to be unreliable. Option D. Configure a custom detection policy within Symantec CCS 11. X to identify systems with the vulnerability and generate alerts for immediate remediation by the security team, ensuring the remediation is logged within CCS. The correct answer is D. Configure a custom detection policy within Symantec CCS 11. X to identify systems with the vulnerability and generate alerts for immediate remediation by the security team, ensuring the remediation is logged within CCS. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT security and compliance, balancing the need for robust security controls with operational efficiency and resource constraints. The risk matrix, a standard tool for risk assessment, highlights a critical vulnerability. The challenge lies in determining the most appropriate response given the potential impact and likelihood of the identified risk, while also considering the practical implications of implementing a solution within the Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11. X environment. The administrator must not only understand the technical aspects of CCS, but also its role in meeting regulatory requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of the risk and the available remediation options within the context of Symantec CCS 11. X. This means understanding how CCS can be configured to detect, report, and potentially mitigate the vulnerability. It also requires considering the specific regulatory framework applicable to the organization. For example, if the organization is subject to U.S. regulations like HIPAA or PCI DSS, the chosen remediation must align with the security controls mandated by these frameworks. The best practice is to leverage CCS's capabilities to implement a control that directly addresses the risk, such as a configuration policy that enforces secure settings or a vulnerability scan that identifies non-compliant systems. This approach ensures that the organization is not only addressing the immediate risk, but also demonstrating due diligence in maintaining a compliant posture, as expected by regulatory bodies. Incorrect approaches analysis. Ignoring the risk entirely is a direct violation of regulatory requirements that mandate risk assessment and mitigation. For instance, under many U.S. data privacy regulations, organizations are required to identify and address security vulnerabilities. Failure to do so can result in significant fines and reputational damage. Implementing a solution that is not supported or manageable by Symantec CCS 11. X creates an operational gap. While the solution might technically address the vulnerability, it undermines the purpose of using CCS as a centralized compliance management tool. This can lead to inconsistent reporting, difficulty in demonstrating compliance, and potential audit failures, as auditors expect controls to be managed and reported through the designated compliance platform. Focusing solely on a technical fix without considering its impact on the regulatory compliance posture is also problematic. A technically sound solution might not satisfy the specific requirements of a particular regulation. For example, a quick patch might fix a software bug, but not address the underlying process or policy deficiency that a regulation requires to be in place. This leads to a false sense of security and leaves the organization exposed to regulatory noncompliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk-based remediation aligned with regulatory mandates. This involves 1. Understanding the risk. Thoroughly analyze the risk identified in the matrix, including its potential impact and likelihood. 2. Regulatory context. Identify all applicable regulatory frameworks and their specific requirements related to the identified risk. 3. CCS capabilities. Evaluate how Symantec CCS 11X can be used to implement, monitor, and report on remediation efforts. 4. Solution evaluation. Assess potential remediation solutions based on their effectiveness in mitigating the risk, their compatibility with CCS, and their alignment with regulatory requirements. 5. Implementation and monitoring. Deploy the chosen solution and establish ongoing monitoring through CCS to ensure sustained compliance. 6. Documentation. Maintain clear documentation of the risk assessment, remediation process, and ongoing monitoring for audit purposes. Question 3. Market research demonstrates that organizations are increasingly leveraging integrated compliance management solutions. When implementing Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11X, what is the most critical aspect of the impact assessment process to ensure continued adherence to U.S. regulatory frameworks such as SOX and HIPAA? Option A. Evaluating how the CCS 11X implementation will affect existing compliance policies, procedures, and reporting mechanisms, and identifying any necessary adjustments to maintain regulatory adherence. Option B. Prioritizing the reduction of operational costs associated with compliance management by streamlining the CCS 11X configuration to the bare minimum required for basic functionality. Option C. Conducting a superficial review of the CCS 11X features without engaging key compliance officers and business unit leaders in the assessment process. Option D. Focusing primarily on the technical performance metrics and resource utilization of the CCS 11X software during its initial deployment phase. The correct answer is A. Evaluating how the CCS 11X implementation will affect existing compliance policies, procedures, and reporting mechanisms, and identifying any necessary adjustments to maintain regulatory adherence. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the implementation of Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11X, particularly its impact assessment capabilities, requires a nuanced understanding of how changes to IT infrastructure can affect an organization's ability to meet regulatory obligations. The challenge lies in accurately identifying and quantifying these impacts to ensure compliance without causing undue disruption or incurring unnecessary costs. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for robust compliance monitoring with operational efficiency. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a systematic and documented process for evaluating the potential effects of CCS 11X implementation on existing compliance controls and reporting mechanisms. This aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management, ensuring that all relevant stakeholders are informed and that potential compliance gaps are addressed proactively. By focusing on the specific regulatory framework relevant to the organization, which, for the purpose of this exam, is assumed to be a U.S.-centric framework like SOX or HIPAA, as CCS is a U.S.-marketed product and the exam is U.S.-focused. This approach ensures that the impact assessment is directly tied to actionable compliance requirements. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining an auditable trail and demonstrating due diligence to regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical deployment of CCS 11X without considering its implications for existing compliance processes would be a significant regulatory failure. This oversight could lead to the misconfiguration of the system, resulting in inaccurate compliance reporting or the failure to detect noncompliance. thereby violating the spirit and letter of regulations that mandate accurate and timely reporting of compliance status. Another incorrect approach, such as prioritizing cost savings over comprehensive impact assessment, could lead to the omission of critical compliance controls or reporting functionalities, directly contravening regulatory requirements for thoroughness and completeness in compliance management. Furthermore, an approach that neglects to involve key compliance and business stakeholders in the impact assessment process would be ethically unsound and professionally negligent, as it fails to ensure that the system effectively supports the organization's overall compliance strategy and business objectives, potentially leading to unforeseen compliance breaches. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the scope of the impact assessment, identifying all relevant compliance regulations and internal policies. This should be followed by a thorough analysis of how the proposed CCS-11X implementation will interact with existing systems and processes. Stakeholder engagement is paramount throughout this process, ensuring that all perspectives are considered. The assessment should result in a documented report outlining identified impacts, proposed mitigation strategies, and any necessary adjustments to compliance procedures. Finally, a validation phase should confirm that the implemented solution effectively addresses the identified impacts and meets all compliance objectives. Question 4. The risk matrix shows a critical vulnerability related to unauthorized access to sensitive data, with a high likelihood and high impact. Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11X has identified a highly effective control that would significantly mitigate this risk, but its implementation requires substantial changes to existing user authentication workflows and may temporarily impact system performance for a subset of users. What is the most appropriate best practice approach for addressing this critical vulnerability? Option A. Implement a less stringent compensating control that is easier to deploy, even if it only partially mitigates the risk, to address the issue quickly. Option B. Defer remediation of this vulnerability until a less disruptive time, perhaps after a major system upgrade, to avoid immediate operational challenges. Option C. Conduct a detailed impact assessment of the proposed control, including technical feasibility, operational disruption, and user experience, and develop a phased implementation plan based on the assessment findings. Option D. Immediately deploy the most stringent control to eliminate the critical vulnerability, accepting any temporary operational disruptions as a necessary consequence of achieving a high level of security. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed impact assessment of the proposed control, including technical feasibility, operational disruption, and user experience, and develop a phased implementation plan based on the assessment findings. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in compliance administration, balancing the need for comprehensive security controls with the practicalities of resource allocation and operational impact. The risk matrix, a standard tool for prioritizing security efforts, highlights a critical vulnerability. However, the immediate implementation of the most stringent control, while seemingly ideal from a pure risk reduction standpoint, could lead to significant disruption and potentially undermine other critical business functions. The challenge lies in making a decision that is both effective in mitigating risk and sustainable for the organization, adhering to regulatory requirements without causing undue operational hardship. This requires a nuanced understanding of the Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS, 11X capabilities, the organization's risk appetite, and the potential impact of control deployment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a phased approach to remediation, informed by a thorough impact assessment. This means not just identifying the risk, but also understanding the implications of implementing the proposed control within the Symantec CCS-11X environment. This includes evaluating the control's compatibility with existing infrastructure, the potential for false positives, the training requirements for administrators and end users, and the overall cost-benefit analysis. By prioritizing remediation efforts based on a combination of risk severity and implementation feasibility, administrators can ensure that critical vulnerabilities are addressed efficiently and effectively, minimizing disruption while maximizing compliance posture. This aligns with best practices in risk management and IT governance, ensuring that security investments are strategically aligned with business objectives and regulatory mandates. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the most stringent control immediately without a proper impact assessment is a failure to adhere to best practices in IT governance and risk management. This approach can lead to significant operational disruption, user frustration, and potentially the disabling of essential business processes, which could indirectly lead to other compliance failures or security gaps. It also demonstrates a lack of strategic thinking, prioritizing a single risk over the holistic health of the IT environment. Ignoring the critical vulnerability identified in the risk matrix due to the perceived complexity of remediation is a direct abdication of responsibility. This constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure, as it knowingly leaves the organization exposed to a high-severity risk. Such an action can result in severe penalties, reputational damage, and data breaches, all of which are contrary to the objectives of compliance and security frameworks. Implementing a control that is only partially effective or that introduces new, unmanaged risks is also a failure. This might occur if the chosen control is not fully understood or if its configuration within Symantec CCS 11X is not optimized. This approach creates a false sense of security, leaving the organization vulnerable while appearing to be compliant, which is a serious ethical and regulatory misstep. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this situation by first thoroughly understanding the Symantec CCS 11X platform's capabilities and limitations concerning the identified vulnerability. This involves consulting documentation, leveraging vendor support, and potentially conducting pilot tests. The next step is to engage with relevant stakeholders, including IT operations, security teams, and business unit leaders, to gather input on the potential impact of various remediation strategies. A risk-based decision-making framework should be employed, considering not only the likelihood and impact of the threat, but also the feasibility and cost of mitigation. This iterative process of assessment, planning, implementation, and validation ensures that security controls are both effective and practical, fostering a robust and sustainable compliance program. Question 5. What factors determine the most effective and compliant approach to optimizing the performance of Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11X within a regulated environment? Option A. The adoption of general IT performance tuning best practices without specific consideration for the regulatory controls managed by CCS. Option B. The cost savings realized from reduced hardware resource utilization following performance enhancements. Option C. The extent to which proposed optimizations are validated against specific regulatory requirements and tested for impact on compliance data integrity and reporting accuracy. Option D. The speed at which performance improvements can be implemented across the entire CCS infrastructure to minimize user disruption. The correct answer is C. The extent to which proposed optimizations are validated against specific regulatory requirements and tested for impact on compliance data integrity and reporting accuracy. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in IT compliance. Optimizing a critical system like Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11X for efficiency without compromising its core regulatory adherence capabilities. The professional challenge lies in balancing performance gains with the absolute necessity of maintaining the integrity and accuracy of compliance reporting, which is directly tied to regulatory requirements. Misjudging this balance can lead to significant compliance failures, financial penalties, and reputational damage. The correct approach focuses on a phased, data-driven optimization strategy that prioritizes regulatory impact. This represents best professional practice because it ensures that any changes made to CCS 11X are thoroughly tested and validated against the specific regulatory frameworks the organization must adhere to. By understanding the dependencies between CCS functions and regulatory mandates, administrators can proactively identify and mitigate risks. This aligns with the ethical obligation to ensure the accuracy and reliability of compliance data, which is fundamental to regulatory trust and accountability. Incorrect approaches fail to adequately consider the regulatory implications. One incorrect approach might involve aggressive, untested performance tuning that could inadvertently disable or corrupt critical compliance data collection or reporting modules. This would represent a direct regulatory failure by compromising the ability to demonstrate compliance, potentially leading to violations of data integrity requirements mandated by relevant authorities. Another incorrect approach might be to ignore performance issues altogether, leading to system degradation that indirectly impacts compliance by making reporting slow, unreliable, or inaccessible, thus failing to meet timely reporting obligations. A third incorrect approach could be to implement optimizations based solely on general IT best practices, without a specific review of how these changes affect the regulatory controls managed by CCS, thereby risking the circumvention or weakening of those controls. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the specific regulatory requirements CCS is configured to enforce. This involves mapping CCS functionality to these requirements. For implementing any optimization, a risk assessment should be conducted, specifically evaluating the potential impact on compliance reporting and control effectiveness. Testing in a non-production environment is crucial, followed by a phased rollout with continuous monitoring. This systematic approach ensures that process optimization enhances, rather than undermines, the organization's ability to meet its regulatory obligations. Question 6. System analysis indicates that the current data collection configuration within Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11 X is leading to significant performance degradation on managed endpoints and an extended processing time for compliance reports. Considering the need to maintain robust compliance with relevant U.S. regulations, which of the following approaches represents the most effective and professionally sound method for optimizing this process? Option A. Implement a blanket policy to collect all available data from every managed endpoint to ensure maximum visibility, regardless of specific regulatory mandates or performance implications. Option B. Increase the processing power and storage capacity of the CCS infrastructure and all managed endpoints to accommodate the current data collection volume without making any changes to the collection policies. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable U.S. regulatory requirements to identify the minimum data points essential for compliance reporting and vulnerability assessment. Then systematically adjust CCS data collection policies to capture only these critical data points, followed by rigorous performance testing and iterative refinement. Option D. Immediately disable data collection for all non-critical compliance checks and reduce the frequency of data collection for all remaining checks to minimize system load. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable U.S. regulatory requirements to identify the minimum data points essential for compliance reporting and vulnerability assessment. Then systematically adjust CCS data collection policies to capture only these critical data points, followed by rigorous performance testing and iterative refinement. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT compliance, balancing the need for comprehensive data collection with the operational impact of that collection. Symantec Control Compliance Suite CCS 11 X is designed to automate compliance reporting and vulnerability assessment. When optimizing processes, administrators must consider the trade-offs between the granularity of data collected and the performance overhead on managed systems and the CCS infrastructure itself. Overly aggressive data collection can lead to system slowdowns, increased network traffic, and longer reporting cycles, potentially hindering the very compliance objectives the system is meant to support. Conversely, insufficient data collection can result in missed vulnerabilities or non-compliance issues, leading to regulatory penalties. The challenge lies in finding the optimal balance that meets regulatory requirements without causing undue operational disruption. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased, data-driven optimization strategy. This begins with a thorough understanding of the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the organization. For example, if the organization is subject to U.S. regulations like HIPAA or SOX, the data collected must directly map to the controls and audit trails mandated by these frameworks. The process then involves profiling the current data collection settings within CCS, identifying areas of high resource consumption or redundancy. Subsequently, targeted adjustments are made, prioritizing the collection of data critical for compliance reporting and vulnerability assessment, while reducing or eliminating the collection of less critical or redundant information. This is followed by rigorous testing and monitoring to assess the impact on system performance and the accuracy of compliance reports. Iterative refinement based on this feedback loop ensures that the optimized process effectively meets compliance mandates while minimizing operational overhead. This approach aligns with best practices for IT process management, emphasizing efficiency, effectiveness, and continuous improvement, all within the bounds of regulatory adherence. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to indiscriminately reduce data collection across all monitored systems without a clear understanding of regulatory mandates or performance impact. This could lead to the omission of crucial audit logs or configuration data required by regulations, resulting in audit failures and potential fines. Another incorrect approach is to increase data collection frequency or detail for all compliance checks without prior analysis or testing. This can overwhelm managed systems, degrade performance, and create an unmanageable volume of data within CCS, negating any potential compliance benefits and introducing new operational risks. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on default CCS configurations without any customization or optimization. While defaults may offer a baseline level of compliance, they are rarely optimized for specific organizational environments or regulatory landscapes, leading to either overcollection and performance issues or undercollection and compliance gaps. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with optimizing Symantec CCS processes must adopt a systematic and risk-based approach. This involves 1. Understanding the regulatory landscape. Clearly identify all applicable regulations and their specific data requirements. 2. Baseline assessment. Document current CCS configurations, data collection settings, and system performance metrics. 3. Impact analysis. Evaluate the potential consequences of any proposed changes on both compliance posture and operational stability. 4. Phased implementation. Introduce changes incrementally, allowing for thorough testing and validation at each stage. 5. Continuous monitoring and refinement. Regularly review performance data and compliance reports to identify further optimization opportunities. This structured decision-making process ensures that optimizations are effective, compliant, and sustainable, mitigating risks and maximizing the value of the CCS investment. Question 7. Strategic planning requires a deliberate approach to configuring Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11, X for regulatory adherence. Considering the need to demonstrate compliance with relevant U.S. federal regulations, which of the following configuration strategies best balances comprehensive audit data collection with efficient resource utilization? Option A. Configure CCS to collect only the specific audit data points directly mandated by the identified U.S. federal regulations, ensuring that each data point is mapped to a clear compliance requirement. Option B. Configure CCS to collect all available audit logs from all systems, regardless of specific regulatory relevance, to ensure no potential compliance data is missed. Option C. Configure CCS to collect audit data based on ease of access and common logging practices across the IT environment, prioritizing readily available information. Option D. Configure CCS to prioritize system performance by collecting only the most basic audit information, with the understanding that more detailed data can be retrieved if specifically requested during an audit. The correct answer is A. Configure CCS to collect only the specific audit data points directly mandated by the identified U.S. federal regulations, ensuring that each data point is mapped to a clear compliance requirement. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in regulatory compliance, balancing the need for comprehensive data collection with the practical limitations of system resources and the potential for data overload. Administrators must ensure that Symantec Control Compliance Suite CCS 11X is configured to capture sufficient evidence for audit purposes without negatively impacting system performance or creating an unmanageable volume of logs. The challenge lies in identifying the minimum necessary data points that satisfy regulatory requirements while remaining efficient. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the specific regulatory frameworks applicable to the organization's industry and geographic location, and then mapping those requirements to the audit data points that CCS can collect. This means identifying which specific controls and configurations are mandated by regulations like SOX, HIPAA, or PCI DSS, depending on the exam's implied jurisdiction, which is U.S.-centric for 250-410, and then configuring CCS to audit only those specific elements. For example, if a regulation mandates logging all failed login attempts to sensitive systems, the administrator should configure CCS to collect this specific data, rather than a broad sweep of all system logs. This ensures compliance with the spirit and letter of the law, provides actionable audit trails, and avoids unnecessary data storage and processing overhead. This aligns with the principle of least privilege applied to data collection, ensuring that only what is required for compliance is gathered. Incorrect approach is analysis, collecting all available audit data without regard for specific regulatory mandates is professionally unacceptable because it leads to significant inefficiencies. This approach incurs unnecessary storage costs, increases the complexity of log analysis, and can obscure critical compliance-related events within a sea of irrelevant data. It also risks violating data privacy regulations by collecting more personal information than is legally required. Furthermore, it demonstrates a lack of understanding of the specific compliance obligations, which is a fundamental failure in regulatory administration. Configuring CCS to collect only data that is easily accessible or commonly logged, without verifying its relevance to specific regulatory requirements, is also professionally unsound. This approach creates a false sense of security, as critical audit gaps may exist that leave the organization non-compliant. It fails to proactively address regulatory mandates and relies on convenience rather than a systematic compliance strategy. This can lead to significant penalties and reputational damage when an audit reveals non-compliance due to insufficient or irrelevant data. Focusing solely on system performance without considering the regulatory implications of data collection is a critical error. While system performance is important, it cannot be prioritized over the fundamental requirement to gather evidence of compliance. A system that runs perfectly but fails to provide the necessary audit trails is ultimately a failure from a compliance perspective. This approach can lead to severe regulatory penalties and legal repercussions, as performance optimization cannot be used as an excuse for non-compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals in regulatory compliance administration must adopt a risk-based and requirements-driven approach. The decision-making process should begin with a clear identification of all applicable regulatory frameworks. Next, these frameworks must be translated into specific audit requirements. Then, the capabilities of Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11. X should be assessed to determine how best to collect the necessary data efficiently. This involves a continuous cycle of configuration, monitoring, and refinement, ensuring that data collection aligns with both regulatory mandates and operational realities. The goal is to achieve demonstrable compliance with minimal waste and maximum effectiveness. Question 8. Compliance review shows that Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11 X is being used to manage a large volume of IT infrastructure changes. To ensure ongoing compliance, the administrator must determine the most effective approach to impact assessment for these changes. Given the dynamic nature of the environment and the need for efficient resource utilization, which of the following strategies best aligns with regulatory expectations for impact assessment in this context? Option A. Defer impact assessments for any change that is labeled as minor by the IT department, assuming these changes pose no significant compliance risk. Option B. Implement a tiered impact assessment process, categorizing changes based on their potential to affect sensitive data, critical business processes, or regulatory compliance controls, and tailoring the depth of assessment accordingly. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive, in-depth impact assessment for every single IT infrastructure change, regardless of its perceived size or scope, to ensure no potential compliance issue is overlooked. Option D. Rely exclusively on the IT implementation team's initial assessment of a change's impact to determine if a formal compliance impact assessment is necessary. The correct answer is B. Implement a tiered impact assessment process, categorizing changes based on their potential to affect sensitive data, critical business processes, or regulatory compliance controls, and tailoring the depth of assessment accordingly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in compliance administration, balancing the need for comprehensive impact assessment with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the dynamic nature of IT environments. The core difficulty lies in determining the appropriate scope and depth of an impact assessment when faced with a significant number of changes, some of which may appear minor on the surface. Overly broad assessments can lead to wasted resources and delayed implementation, while insufficient assessments risk overlooking critical compliance implications. The administrator must exercise professional judgment to prioritize effectively and ensure that the assessment process remains both thorough and efficient, aligning with the organization's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a risk-based methodology for prioritizing impact assessments. This aligns with best practices in compliance management and regulatory expectations, which often mandate a proportionate response to identified risks. By categorizing changes based on their potential to affect sensitive data, critical business processes, or regulatory compliance controls, the administrator can focus resources on the most critical areas. This approach ensures that significant compliance risks are identified and mitigated, while avoiding unnecessary expenditure of time and effort on low-risk changes. It demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and a proactive stance towards maintaining compliance, which is a cornerstone of ethical and professional conduct in this field. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to conduct a full, detailed impact assessment for every single change, regardless of its perceived significance. This is professionally inefficient and unsustainable. It fails to acknowledge the principle of proportionality in risk management and can lead to significant resource drain, potentially diverting attention from more critical compliance activities. Ethically, it represents a poor stewardship of organizational resources. Another incorrect approach is to bypass impact assessments entirely for changes deemed minor, without a documented, objective justification. This is a direct violation of due diligence principles and regulatory requirements that mandate understanding the potential impact of changes on compliance. It creates a significant risk of non-compliance, as seemingly minor changes can have cascading effects on security controls or data handling processes, leading to regulatory breaches and potential penalties. This approach demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and an abdication of the administrator's duty to safeguard compliance. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the subjective opinion of the IT team implementing the changes to determine the need for an impact assessment. While IT teams have technical knowledge, they may not possess the comprehensive understanding of regulatory requirements and compliance frameworks that a dedicated administrator does. This can lead to a biased assessment where compliance implications are overlooked due to a lack of specialized knowledge, resulting in potential regulatory failures and a breach of professional duty to ensure adherence to all applicable laws and guidelines. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should adopt a structured, risk-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the organization's regulatory landscape and compliance obligations. 2. Establishing clear criteria for categorizing changes based on their potential impact on compliance controls, data privacy, and business operations. 3. Implementing a tiered approach to impact assessments where high-risk changes receive more rigorous scrutiny. 4. Documenting the rationale for all assessment decisions, including the justification for prioritizing or deprioritizing certain changes. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating the impact assessment methodology to reflect changes in the regulatory environment and the organization's IT infrastructure. This systematic approach ensures that compliance is managed effectively, efficiently, and in accordance with professional standards and regulatory expectations. Question 9. Quality control measures reveal a new regulatory mandate has been issued that significantly impacts data privacy reporting requirements for sensitive customer information. As the administrator of Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11X, what is the most prudent approach to ensure compliance while minimizing disruption to ongoing operations? Option A. Implement changes to CCS 11X based solely on the interpretation of the new regulation provided by the IT security team without further consultation. Option B. Immediately update all existing CCS 11X data privacy reports to include all possible sensitive customer data fields, assuming this will satisfy the new mandate. Option C. Rely on the existing CCS 11X reporting framework, assuming it is sufficiently robust to cover new regulatory requirements without any modifications. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the new regulation to identify specific data privacy reporting obligations, then assess current CCS 11X configurations, policies, and reporting capabilities against these requirements. Subsequently, engage with legal, IT security, and relevant business stakeholders to develop and test a phased implementation plan for any necessary adjustments. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the new regulation to identify specific data privacy reporting obligations, then assess current CCS 11 X configurations, policies, and reporting capabilities against these requirements. Subsequently, engage with legal, IT security, and relevant business stakeholders to develop and test a phased implementation plan for any necessary adjustments. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in compliance administration where a new, potentially impactful regulatory requirement emerges. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting the scope and applicability of the new regulation to the existing Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11 X environment and its current operational processes. Stakeholders, particularly those responsible for IT infrastructure and business operations, may have varying levels of understanding of the regulation and its implications, leading to potential resistance or misallocation of resources. The pressure to comply quickly without fully understanding the impact on CCS functionality and data integrity necessitates a structured and informed approach. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, multifaceted analysis that begins with understanding the specific requirements of the new regulation. This includes identifying which aspects of the regulation directly pertain to data security, privacy, and reporting, as these are core functions of CCS. Subsequently, a detailed assessment of the current CCS 11 X configuration, policies, and reporting capabilities is crucial to determine gaps. Engaging with relevant stakeholders, including IT security, legal, and business unit representatives, is essential to gather diverse perspectives and ensure buy-in. The final step involves developing a phased implementation plan that prioritizes critical compliance areas, tests changes thoroughly within a non-production environment, and includes comprehensive training for administrators. This approach ensures that compliance is achieved effectively, efficiently, and with minimal disruption to ongoing operations, aligning with the principles of due diligence and responsible system administration expected under regulatory frameworks. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately implement broad, sweeping changes to CCS configurations without a clear understanding of the regulation's specific mandates. This risks overcompliance, unnecessary system complexity, and potential disruption to essential business functions. Fails to demonstrate a reasoned, risk-based approach to compliance, which is often a regulatory expectation. Another incorrect approach is to assume that existing CCS policies and reports are sufficient without a formal review against the new regulation. This can lead to significant compliance gaps, as regulations often have nuances that existing controls may not adequately address. This approach demonstrates a lack of proactive due diligence and a reliance on outdated assumptions, which can result in regulatory penalties. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with implementation based solely on the interpretation of a single department, such as IT security, without consulting legal counsel or business stakeholders. This can lead to misinterpretations of legal obligations or operational impacts, resulting in non-compliance or inefficient resource allocation. It bypasses essential cross-functional collaboration required for effective regulatory adherence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, risk-based approach to regulatory changes. This involves 1. Understanding the regulation. Deconstruct the new requirements and their direct relevance to the organization's operations and the CCS environment. 2. Assessing current state. Map existing CCS configurations, policies, and controls against the identified regulatory requirements to pinpoint gaps. 3. Stakeholder engagement. Collaborate with legal, IT, and business units to ensure a comprehensive understanding of implications and to build consensus. 4. Solution design and testing. Develop targeted solutions, prioritizing based on risk and impact, and rigorously test them in a controlled environment. 5. Phased implementation and training. Roll out changes incrementally, monitor effectiveness, and provide adequate training to ensure ongoing compliance. This structured process minimizes risk, optimizes resource utilization, and ensures robust adherence to regulatory mandates. Question 10. Benchmark analysis indicates that an organization utilizing Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11 X is conducting its annual risk assessment, Which of the following approaches best aligns with effective risk management principles and regulatory expectations for a comprehensive assessment? Option A. Leveraging CCS 11. X for automated data collection and vulnerability identification, followed by a human-driven analysis that prioritizes risks based on business impact, asset criticality, and threat likelihood. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive vulnerability scan using CCS 11. X and prioritizing remediation based solely on the number of vulnerabilities identified across all systems. Option C. Relying entirely on the default risk scoring provided by CCS 11. X for all identified vulnerabilities, without further contextualization or expert review. Option D. Focusing exclusively on ensuring all systems meet the minimum requirements of relevant compliance checklists, without a separate risk assessment process. The correct answer is B. Conducting a comprehensive vulnerability scan using CCS 11. X and prioritizing remediation based solely on the number of vulnerabilities identified across all systems. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in risk assessment within an organization using Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11. X. The challenge lies in balancing the need for comprehensive risk identification with the practical limitations of resources and the dynamic nature of the IT environment. A key difficulty is ensuring that the risk assessment process is not merely a procedural exercise, but a meaningful input into security strategy and control implementation. The organization must avoid superficial assessments that fail to uncover critical vulnerabilities or overassessments that lead to wasted effort and resources. The integration of CCS 11X implies a reliance on its capabilities for data collection and analysis, but the human element of interpreting and acting upon this data remains paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and iterative process that leverages CCS 11X for data gathering and analysis, but critically, incorporates expert human judgment and contextual understanding. This approach aligns with best practices in risk management, which emphasize understanding the business context, identifying relevant threats and vulnerabilities, and assessing the potential impact. By focusing on the most critical assets and business processes first, the organization ensures that its limited resources are directed towards the highest risk areas. The iterative nature allows for refinement as new information becomes available or as the threat landscape evolves. This aligns with the principles of continuous monitoring and improvement, often mandated by regulatory frameworks that require organizations to maintain an up-to-date understanding of their risk posture. The use of CCS 11X in this context is to automate data collection and provide a baseline for analysis, not to replace the strategic thinking required for effective risk assessment. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that relies solely on automated scans without human validation and contextualization is professionally unacceptable because it risks generating false positives or negatives. Automated tools, while powerful, may not understand the business criticality of certain systems or the specific threat actors targeting the organization. This can lead to misprioritization of risks and ineffective allocation of resources. Furthermore, it fails to meet the spirit of regulatory requirements that often demand a nuanced understanding of an organization's unique risk profile. An approach that focuses only on compliance checklists without a corresponding risk assessment is also professionally flawed. Compliance is a component of security, but it is not synonymous with risk management. An organization can be compliant with certain regulations without adequately addressing its most significant risks. This approach neglects the proactive identification and mitigation of potential threats that could impact business operations, leading to potential breaches and financial losses, and failing to meet the overarching goal of risk reduction. An approach that prioritizes risks based solely on the number of vulnerabilities detected, without considering the exploitability, impact, or business context, is a superficial and potentially dangerous practice. This method ignores the fact that a system with many low-severity vulnerabilities might pose less risk than a system with a single high-severity vulnerability that is easily exploitable and could have a catastrophic impact on critical business functions. This failure to perform a qualitative and quantitative impact analysis is a significant regulatory and ethical lapse, as it can lead to a false sense of security or misdirected remediation efforts. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment by first understanding the organization's business objectives and critical assets. This context is essential for prioritizing risks effectively. The next step involves identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities, where tools like CCS-11X can be invaluable for data collection. However, this data must be analyzed and interpreted by skilled personnel who can assess the likelihood and impact of identified risks. The process should be iterative, with regular reviews and updates to reflect changes in the environment and threat landscape. Decision-making should be guided by a framework that balances technical findings with business impact, regulatory requirements, and available resources, ensuring that remediation efforts are focused on the most significant risks. Question 11. The efficiency study reveals that the Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11X environment, tasked with ensuring adherence to U.S. federal data privacy regulations, is experiencing significant delays in generating critical compliance reports. Considering the need for timely and accurate reporting to satisfy regulatory oversight, which of the following strategies would best address these reporting inefficiencies while maintaining robust compliance? Option A. Immediately upgrade the hardware specifications of the CCS reporting server to a higher tier, assuming that increased processing power will resolve the reporting delays without further investigation. Option B. Reduce the frequency of data collection and the scope of compliance checks performed by CCS to expedite report generation, prioritizing speed over comprehensive data coverage. Option C. Implement a manual workaround for generating critical reports by exporting raw data and processing it externally, bypassing the CCS reporting engine entirely. Option D. Conduct a detailed analysis of the existing compliance policies and data collection configurations within CCS to identify and optimize resource-intensive processes, alongside a review of the reporting server's performance metrics and resource allocation. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed analysis of the existing compliance policies and data collection configurations within CCS to identify and optimize resource-intensive processes, alongside a review of the reporting server's performance metrics and resource allocation. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals that the current implementation of Symantec Control Compliance Suite CCS 11X for managing compliance with U.S. federal regulations, specifically those pertaining to data security and privacy like HIPAA, is experiencing significant delays in reporting and remediation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts the organization's ability to demonstrate compliance, potentially leading to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and operational inefficiencies. The pressure to rectify these issues quickly, while maintaining data integrity and security, requires a nuanced understanding of CCS capabilities and regulatory mandates. The correct approach involves a systematic review of the CCS reporting engine configuration and the underlying data collection processes. This includes analyzing the frequency and scope of data collection, the complexity of the compliance policies being applied, and the performance of the reporting infrastructure. Optimizing these elements, such as adjusting data collection schedules to avoid peak loads, refining policy logic to reduce processing overhead, and ensuring adequate hardware resources for the reporting server, directly addresses the identified efficiency bottlenecks. This approach is best professional practice because it aligns with the core principles of effective compliance management: accuracy, timeliness, and efficiency. By focusing on the technical and procedural aspects of CCS, it ensures that the system can accurately and promptly generate compliance reports, thereby satisfying regulatory requirements for demonstrable oversight and control. This proactive and data-driven optimization directly supports the organization's legal and ethical obligations under U.S. federal regulations to maintain a secure and compliant environment. An incorrect approach would be to simply increase the hardware resources allocated to the CCS reporting server without a thorough analysis of the reporting configurations. While more resources might offer a temporary improvement, it fails to address the root cause of the inefficiency, which could be poorly optimized policies or excessive data collection. This is a regulatory failure because it does not guarantee sustained compliance and may lead to continued reporting delays, making it difficult to meet regulatory deadlines. Another incorrect approach is to reduce the scope of data collection or the frequency of reporting to speed up the process. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Reducing data scope or frequency can lead to blind spots in security monitoring and an inability to detect or respond to compliance violations in a timely manner, directly contravening the intent of regulations like HIPAA, which mandate comprehensive oversight. Furthermore, it creates a false sense of security and can lead to severe penalties if a breach or non-compliance event occurs that would have been detected with more thorough reporting. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured problem-solving methodology. First, clearly define the problem and its impact, referencing specific regulatory requirements. Second, gather data to understand the current state of the system and identify potential root causes. Third, evaluate various solutions based on their effectiveness, efficiency, cost, and critically, their impact on regulatory compliance. Fourth, implement the chosen solution with a clear plan for testing and validation. Finally, establish ongoing monitoring and review processes to ensure sustained performance and compliance. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are not only technically sound, but also ethically and regulatorily defensible. Question 12. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a critical security control managed by Symantec Control Compliance Suite CCS 11X has been misconfigured, potentially exposing sensitive data. The IT operations team is ready to implement a fix, but the compliance team is in the final stages of preparing for an upcoming audit. Which of the following actions best balances immediate risk mitigation with the integrity of the audit process? Option A. Immediately implement the fix by the IT operations team and inform the compliance team after the remediation is complete. Option B. Proceed with the audit as scheduled and address the misconfiguration after the audit concludes to avoid impacting the audit report. Option C. Instruct the IT operations team to temporarily disable the affected control until the audit is completed to prevent any potential audit findings related to the misconfiguration. Option D. Notify the compliance team of the misconfiguration and collaboratively develop a remediation plan that includes revalidation of the control and documentation for audit purposes. Correct answer is A. Immediately implement the fix by the IT operations team and inform the compliance team after the remediation is complete. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT governance where a critical security control, managed by Symantec Control Compliance Suite CCS 11X, is found to be misconfigured. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to remediate the misconfiguration with the potential impact on ongoing compliance audits and reporting. Stakeholders, including the compliance team and the IT operations team, have differing priorities and perspectives. The compliance team is concerned with the integrity of audit evidence and the potential for non-compliance findings, while the IT operations team is focused on restoring functionality and minimizing disruption. Navigating these competing interests while adhering to regulatory requirements is professionally demanding. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured communication and remediation process that prioritizes immediate risk mitigation while ensuring audit integrity. This aligns with best practices for IT governance and compliance. Specifically, it requires 1. Immediate notification to the compliance team about the misconfiguration and the planned remediation steps. This ensures transparency and allows the compliance team to assess the impact on current audits and reporting. 2. Collaborative development of a remediation plan with the IT operations team, including a rollback strategy if necessary, to minimize operational disruption. 3. Execution of the remediation, followed by revalidation of the control using Symantec CCS to confirm its correct configuration and effectiveness. 4. Documentation of the entire process, including the initial finding, remediation steps, and revalidation results. This documentation serves as crucial evidence for auditors and demonstrates a proactive approach to security and compliance management. This approach upholds the principle of least privilege and defense in depth by addressing the vulnerability promptly, while also respecting the audit process and ensuring that compliance reporting remains accurate and defensible. It demonstrates a commitment to both operational security and regulatory adherence, which are core tenets of effective IT governance. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to immediately notify the compliance team about the misconfiguration and proceeding with remediation without their awareness is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach undermines the integrity of audit evidence. Auditors rely on accurate and complete data to assess compliance. Concealing or delaying the reporting of a control failure, even if subsequently fixed, can be interpreted as an attempt to mislead or obstruct the audit process. This violates principles of transparency and accountability, which are fundamental to most regulatory frameworks governing data security and compliance. Remediating the misconfiguration without proper planning or rollback strategy, and without revalidating the control, poses a risk of introducing new issues or failing to fully address the original problem. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and can lead to continued noncompliance or operational instability. From a regulatory perspective, it suggests a failure to implement effective internal controls and risk management processes, which are often mandated by regulations. Ignoring the misconfiguration until the next scheduled audit is a direct violation of proactive risk management principles. Regulations typically require timely identification and remediation of security vulnerabilities. Delaying action allows the risk to persist, potentially leading to data breaches or other security incidents. This passive approach is ethically unsound as it prioritizes convenience over the protection of sensitive data and the organization's compliance posture. It also demonstrates a failure to understand the dynamic nature of security threats and the need for continuous monitoring and improvement. Professional reasoning. Professionals in IT governance and compliance must adopt a proactive and transparent approach. When a critical control is found to be misconfigured, the decision-making process should involve 1. Immediate identification and assessment of the risk posed by the misconfiguration. 2. Prioritization of remediation based on the severity of the risk. 3. Clear and timely communication with all relevant stakeholders, including compliance, operations, and management. 4. Development and execution of a well-documented remediation plan, including validation steps. 5. Continuous monitoring to ensure the control remains effective. This structured approach ensures that risks are managed effectively, compliance is maintained, and the organization's reputation is protected. It emphasizes collaboration, accountability, and a commitment to best practices in security and governance. Question 13. The control framework reveals that Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11X is generating a high volume of alerts, impacting the security team's ability to respond effectively. As the administrator, what is the most professional and compliant approach to optimize alert generation while ensuring critical policy violations are not missed? Option A. Gradually tune alert thresholds and severities based on risk assessment and observed false positive rates, prioritizing high-impact violations and progressively expanding the scope as resources allow. Option B. Implement a policy to alert on every single deviation from a standard, ensuring no potential violation is overlooked, even if it leads to a significant increase in alert volume. Option C. Rely primarily on manual review of raw log data for compliance checks, as automated alerts can be unreliable and overwhelming. Option D. Immediately disable alerts for any control that is generating a disproportionately high number of notifications, regardless of its criticality. The correct answer is A. Gradually tune alert thresholds and severities based on risk assessment and observed false positive rates, prioritizing high-impact violations and progressively expanding the scope as resources allow. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in compliance administration, balancing the need for comprehensive data collection with the practical limitations of system resources and the potential for alert fatigue. The administrator must determine the most effective method for identifying policy violations within Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11X, without overwhelming the security team or generating excessive noise. The challenge lies in selecting a strategy that is both efficient and effective in meeting regulatory and internal policy requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased and risk-based methodology for alert tuning. This aligns with best practices in security operations and compliance management by prioritizing critical findings and reducing the signal-to-noise ratio. By initially focusing on high-severity alerts and gradually expanding the scope based on analysis and resource availability, the administrator ensures that the most significant risks are addressed promptly. This approach is professionally sound because it demonstrates a systematic and data-driven method for optimizing the CCS environment, leading to more effective incident response and resource allocation. It also implicitly supports regulatory requirements for effective risk management and timely remediation by ensuring that critical issues are not missed due to an overwhelming volume of less important alerts. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing a blanket policy to alert on every single deviation from a standard, regardless of severity or context, is a failure of professional judgment and regulatory compliance. This approach leads to alert fatigue, where genuine threats can be overlooked amidst a deluge of minor or irrelevant notifications. Ethically and regulatorily, this demonstrates a lack of due diligence in managing security risks, potentially violating requirements for effective monitoring and incident response. Disabling alerts for specific controls without a thorough risk assessment or documented justification is also professionally unacceptable. This creates blind spots in the system's monitoring capabilities, leaving the organization vulnerable to undetected policy violations. Such an action could directly contravene regulatory mandates that require comprehensive oversight and adherence to established security baselines. Relying solely on manual review of raw log data, without leveraging CCS's automated alerting and reporting capabilities, is inefficient and prone to human error. While manual review can be a supplementary tool, it cannot replace the systematic and scalable approach offered by the CCS platform. This failure to utilize the system's intended functionality hinders effective compliance and risk management, potentially leading to missed violations and non-compliance with regulatory expectations for robust security monitoring. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach alert tuning in CCS 11X by first understanding the organization's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. Phased implementation, starting with high-impact controls and gradually refining the alert thresholds, is crucial. This involves close collaboration with relevant stakeholders, including security operations and IT teams, to validate alert criticality and minimize false positives. Continuous monitoring and periodic review of alert configurations are essential to adapt to evolving threats and business needs. The decision-making process should be documented, with clear justifications for any changes made to alert policies, ensuring auditability and accountability. Question 14. The performance metrics show a consistent pattern of policy violations related to user access controls on critical servers, as reported by Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11X. The administrator needs to address these violations effectively. Which of the following actions best represents a professional and compliant approach to resolving these recurring access control issues? Option A. Manually adjust user access controls on a select number of critical servers to address the reported violations, without updating the CCS policies or documenting the changes. Option B. Immediately escalate the recurring policy violations to senior management without performing any initial investigation or analysis of the CCS reports. Option C. Investigate the specific server configurations and system logs that are triggering the CCS policy violations, identify the root cause of the misconfigurations, and then update the access control policies within CCS and on the affected servers to align with documented security standards and regulatory requirements. Option D. Disable the specific user access control policies within CCS that are consistently flagging violations to eliminate the reported non-compliance from the dashboard. The correct answer is C. Investigate the specific server configurations and system logs that are triggering the CCS policy violations, identify the root cause of the misconfigurations, and then update the access control policies within CCS and on the affected servers to align with documented security standards and regulatory requirements. Explanation. The performance metrics show a consistent pattern of policy violations being flagged by Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11X, particularly concerning the configuration of user access controls on critical servers. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts the organization's security posture and its ability to demonstrate compliance with regulatory requirements. The administrator must not only identify the root cause of the violations, but also implement effective remediation that aligns with established security best practices and any applicable regulatory mandates. The pressure to resolve these issues quickly without introducing new vulnerabilities or disrupting operations adds to the complexity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a systematic, evidence-based investigation. By correlating the CCS findings with system logs and configuration files, the administrator can pinpoint the exact misconfigurations. the subsequent remediation, which involves updating the access control policies to align with the organization's documented security standards and regulatory obligations, directly addresses the identified noncompliance. This method ensures that the fix is targeted, verifiable, and sustainable, thereby strengthening the overall security and compliance framework. This aligns with the principle of due diligence in maintaining a secure environment and adhering to regulatory frameworks that mandate appropriate access controls. An incorrect approach that involves simply disabling the specific policy checks within CCS is professionally unacceptable. This action represents a failure to address the underlying security risk and a direct violation of the principle of maintaining an accurate and effective compliance monitoring system. It creates a false sense of security and leaves the organization vulnerable to actual security breaches and regulatory penalties for noncompliance. Ethically, it is a dereliction of duty to mask or ignore identified risks. Another incorrect approach, such as manually adjusting access controls on a few servers without documenting the changes or verifying their impact through CCS, is also professionally unacceptable. This ad hoc method is prone to errors, inconsistencies, and a lack of auditability. It fails to establish a repeatable and scalable process for maintaining compliance, potentially leading to new violations on other servers or a regression of the fix. This approach undermines the integrity of the compliance program and demonstrates a lack of systematic problem solving. A third incorrect approach, which is to immediately escalate the issue to senior management without conducting any initial investigation, is professionally inefficient and demonstrates a lack of initiative. While escalation is sometimes necessary, bypassing the initial troubleshooting steps prevents the administrator from gathering crucial information that would inform the escalation. This can lead to miscommunication, wasted management time, and a delay in effective resolution. It fails to leverage the capabilities of the compliance tool to diagnose and propose solutions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the reported violations and their potential impact. Second, gather all relevant data from the compliance tool and system logs. Third, analyze the data to identify the root cause. Fourth, develop and implement a targeted remediation plan. Fifth, verify the effectiveness of the remediation through rescanning or further monitoring. And finally, document all actions taken and update relevant policies and procedures. This methodical approach ensures that issues are resolved effectively, efficiently, and in a manner that strengthens the organization's security and compliance posture. Question 15. The efficiency study reveals that while Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11, X is effectively identifying a majority of policy violations, a significant number of critical vulnerabilities are not being flagged due to misconfigurations in the agent deployment and reporting policies. The project sponsor, who is keen to showcase the success of the CCS implementation, has requested that the report focus exclusively on the high rate of policy violation detection, omitting any mention of the unaddressed critical vulnerabilities. What is the most appropriate course of action for the administrator? Option A. Present a comprehensive report detailing both the successful policy violation detection and the critical vulnerabilities that are being missed due to misconfigurations, along with recommendations for remediation. Option B. Immediately escalate the sponsor's request to senior management and the compliance officer, outlining the ethical and regulatory implications of omitting critical findings from the efficiency study. Option C. Fulfill the sponsor's request by preparing a report that highlights only the successful policy violation detection, as this demonstrates the overall value of the CCS implementation. Option D. Prepare a report that selectively includes data points supporting the sponsor's desired narrative of success, while subtly downplaying or omitting the details about the misconfigurations and missed vulnerabilities. The correct answer is A. Present a comprehensive report detailing both the successful policy violation detection and the critical vulnerabilities that are being missed due to misconfigurations, along with recommendations for remediation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical obligation to maintain data integrity and adhere to regulatory compliance requirements when faced with pressure to present favorable, albeit potentially misleading, results. The administrator must balance the desire to demonstrate the effectiveness of Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS, 11, X with the imperative to report accurate findings, even if they highlight areas needing improvement. The core of the challenge lies in the potential for selective reporting to create a false impression of compliance or system performance, which can have significant downstream consequences for the organization's risk posture and regulatory standing. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency and accuracy in reporting. By presenting the full spectrum of findings, including areas where CCS 11X is not meeting expectations or where configurations are suboptimal, the administrator upholds the integrity of the efficiency study and provides actionable insights for improvement. This aligns with the principles of responsible data management and reporting, which are fundamental to maintaining trust with stakeholders and ensuring effective risk mitigation. Furthermore, accurate reporting allows for informed decision-making regarding resource allocation and system optimization, ultimately strengthening the organization's compliance framework. An incorrect approach that involves omitting or downplaying negative findings would represent a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Such an action could lead to a misrepresentation of the organization's compliance status, potentially violating regulations that mandate accurate reporting of control effectiveness. This could result in penalties, reputational damage, and a false sense of security regarding the organization's security and compliance posture. Another incorrect approach, such as fabricating positive results, is outright fraudulent and carries severe legal and professional repercussions. It undermines the entire purpose of compliance monitoring and reporting, creating a foundation of deceit that can lead to catastrophic failures. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on the positive aspects without acknowledging any limitations or areas for improvement, also distorts reality and prevents necessary corrective actions, thereby failing to meet the spirit of a comprehensive efficiency study. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the study's objectives and the relevant regulatory requirements. They should then gather all data objectively, analyze it thoroughly, and present findings in a balanced and factual manner. When faced with pressure to alter results, professionals should assert the importance of data integrity and ethical reporting, escalating the issue if necessary to ensure compliance and prevent misleading information from being disseminated. Question 16. The audit findings indicate a lack of granular visibility into specific user interactions with sensitive data residing on key file servers, potentially hindering the organization's ability to demonstrate compliance with data access control mandates. As the Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11X administrator, what is the most appropriate course of action to address this deficiency while adhering to best practices for system administration and regulatory oversight? Option A. Configure CCS to collect detailed audit logs for file access events on the identified critical servers, focusing on user actions, timestamps, and data accessed. Option B. Increase the overall logging verbosity across all servers and applications managed by CCS to capture a broader range of events. Option C. Disable logging for less critical systems to allocate more resources for enhanced logging on the servers flagged in the audit. Option D. Acknowledge the audit finding but maintain current logging levels, assuming existing data is sufficient for general compliance. The correct answer is A. Configure CCS to collect detailed audit logs for file access events on the identified critical servers, focusing on user actions, timestamps, and data accessed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in compliance administration, balancing the need for granular data collection with the practicalities of system performance and user experience. The audit findings highlight a potential gap in the ability to track specific user actions related to sensitive data access, which could have significant implications for regulatory compliance and internal security policies. The administrator must determine the most effective and compliant method to enhance logging without negatively impacting the system's overall stability or introducing new security risks. The challenge lies in interpreting the audit's intent and translating it into actionable, technically sound, and policy-aligned configuration changes within Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11X. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves leveraging CCS's granular logging capabilities, specifically by configuring detailed audit trails for file access events on critical servers. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and the need for comprehensive auditability, which are fundamental to many regulatory frameworks requiring accountability for sensitive data handling. By enabling detailed logging, the administrator can capture the necessary information to address the audit findings, providing evidence of who accessed what data, when, and from where. This proactive stance ensures that the organization can demonstrate compliance with data protection and access control requirements, thereby mitigating risks identified by the audit. This approach is best professional practice as it directly addresses the identified deficiency with a targeted, system-supported solution that enhances security posture and auditability. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a blanket increase in logging levels across all servers and applications without specific targeting is an incorrect approach. This would likely lead to excessive data generation, overwhelming storage capacity, impacting system performance, and making it difficult to identify relevant security events amidst the noise. This approach fails to demonstrate a nuanced understanding of the audit findings and risks, creating more problems than it solves, potentially leading to a violation of operational efficiency guidelines and increased costs. Disabling logging for non-critical systems to free up resources for more detailed logging on critical systems is also an incorrect approach. While resource management is important, selectively disabling logging, especially without a clear policy justification and risk assessment, creates blind spots in the security monitoring infrastructure. This could lead to undetected security incidents on those non-critical systems, which may still house sensitive information or be entry points for attackers. This violates the principle of comprehensive monitoring and could result in non-compliance with regulations that mandate logging across all relevant systems. Ignoring the audit findings and assuming the current logging levels are sufficient is a fundamentally flawed approach. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to address potential security and compliance risks. It leaves the organization vulnerable to ongoing or future audit failures and regulatory penalties. This approach is ethically and professionally unacceptable, as it neglects the responsibility to maintain a secure and compliant environment. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such audit findings should first thoroughly understand the scope and specific concerns raised by the audit. This involves reviewing the audit report in detail to identify the exact nature of the deficiency. Next, they should consult relevant internal policies and external regulatory requirements to determine the minimum acceptable standard for logging and auditing. The next step is to evaluate the capabilities of the deployed technology, in this case, Symantec CCS11X, to address the identified gap. This involves understanding how to configure specific audit policies, data collection settings, and reporting mechanisms. A risk-based approach is crucial, prioritizing the enhancement of logging for systems and data deemed most critical or sensitive. Finally, any proposed changes should be tested in a non-production environment where possible, and a clear communication plan should be established with stakeholders regarding the implemented changes and their impact. Question 17. The audit findings indicate that certain sensitive data processing activities within the organization are not consistently adhering to the specified control objectives outlined in the relevant regulatory framework. Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11X is deployed and configured to monitor these controls. Which of the following actions best addresses this situation to ensure ongoing compliance and provide auditable evidence? Option A. Initiate a comprehensive, organization-wide reconfiguration of all data security policies within Symantec CCS11X to broadly enhance security posture, assuming this will cover the specific audit findings. Option B. Document the audit findings as a minor issue with low immediate risk and plan to address it during the next scheduled system review cycle, relying on existing, unverified manual processes. Option C. Manually implement compensating controls outside of Symantec CCS11X for the identified data processing activities, and assume these manual adjustments will satisfy the audit requirements without further integration. Option D. Utilize Symantec CCS11X reporting features to generate detailed compliance reports for the affected data processing activities, identify specific control failures, and then implement targeted remediation actions within CCS to address these failures, followed by reassessment. The correct answer is D. Utilize Symantec CCS11X reporting features to generate detailed compliance reports for the affected data processing activities, identify specific control failures, and then implement targeted remediation actions within CCS to address these failures, followed by reassessment. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential gap in the organization's ability to demonstrate compliance with specific regulatory requirements related to data privacy and security. The challenge lies in interpreting the audit's findings within the context of the Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS. 11. X environment and determining the most effective remediation strategy that aligns with the organization's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. This requires a deep understanding of CCS capabilities, the specific regulations being audited against, and the potential impact of non-compliance. The correct approach involves leveraging CCS's reporting and assessment features to precisely identify the scope and root cause of the non-compliance. This allows for targeted remediation efforts, ensuring that resources are allocated efficiently and that the organization can provide verifiable evidence of compliance to auditors. This aligns with best professional practice by prioritizing data-driven decision-making and demonstrating due diligence in addressing identified risks, thereby upholding the organization's commitment to regulatory adherence and data protection. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on a broad, system-wide configuration change without pinpointing the specific failing controls would be inefficient and potentially disruptive. This fails to address the root cause and may introduce new vulnerabilities or compliance issues. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the findings due to perceived low risk, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. It demonstrates a disregard for established compliance frameworks and exposes the organization to potential penalties, reputational damage, and loss of stakeholder trust. A third incorrect approach, relying on manual workarounds without integrating them into CCS for ongoing monitoring, undermines the purpose of a compliance management system. This leads to a fragmented compliance posture, making it difficult to maintain consistent adherence and provide auditable proof of control effectiveness. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the audit findings and their implications. This involves 1. Assessing the severity and scope of the identified noncompliance. 2. Evaluating the capabilities of Symantec CCS 11X to address the issue, including its reporting, assessment, and remediation features. 3. Considering the organization's risk tolerance and regulatory obligations. 4. Developing and evaluating potential remediation strategies based on these factors. And 5. Selecting and implementing the most appropriate solution, followed by verification and ongoing monitoring. Question 18. Assessment of the optimal configuration for vulnerability scanning frequency within Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11. X for a production database containing sensitive customer financial data, considering regulatory compliance and operational impact. Option A. Rely on the default scanning schedule provided by Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11. X without any modifications. Option B. Implement a risk-based scanning schedule, performing more frequent scans, e.g., daily or multiple times per week, during off-peak hours for the sensitive database, while adjusting frequency for less critical assets based on their risk profile and regulatory requirements. Option C. Schedule scans to run daily during peak business hours to ensure immediate detection of any new vulnerabilities. Option D. Configure scans to run weekly during off-peak hours, prioritizing minimal disruption to production systems. The correct answer is C. Schedule scans to run daily during peak business hours to ensure immediate detection of any new vulnerabilities. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT security administration, balancing the need for comprehensive security monitoring with the practical limitations of resource allocation and potential impact on system performance. The administrator must decide how to configure a critical security control within Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS. 11X, specifically regarding the frequency of vulnerability scanning for a sensitive production database. The challenge lies in selecting a scanning schedule that is both effective in identifying threats and compliant with potential regulatory requirements, without causing undue disruption to business operations. The administrator must consider the sensitivity of the data, the potential attack vectors, and the operational impact of frequent scans. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a risk-based decision-making process that aligns with best practices for security administration and regulatory compliance. This approach prioritizes the security of sensitive data by implementing more frequent scans for critical assets, while acknowledging the need to manage performance impact. It involves understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the data stored in the production database, e.g., PCI DSS, HIPAA if applicable in the specified jurisdiction, though for this exam, we assume a general compliance framework that emphasizes data protection and regular auditing. By configuring CCS to perform scans at frequency that balances detection capabilities with operational stability, the administrator demonstrates a commitment to proactive security and due diligence. This approach is best professional practice because it directly addresses the principle of least privilege and defense in depth, ensuring that high-risk systems are continuously monitored. It also reflects an understanding of the operational realities of managing production environments, aiming to minimize disruption while maximizing security posture. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to configure scans at the lowest possible frequency to minimize performance impact, regardless of the data's sensitivity or regulatory mandates. This fails to meet the due diligence required for protecting sensitive information and could lead to significant regulatory penalties if a breach occurs due to undetected vulnerabilities. It ignores the principle of risk assessment and prioritizes convenience over security. Another incorrect approach would be to configure scans at the highest possible frequency without considering the operational impact. While this might seem like the most secure option, it can lead to system instability, performance degradation, and potentially render the system unusable, thereby disrupting business operations. This approach lacks a balanced risk assessment and can be counterproductive to overall security by making the system unreliable. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on default CCS scan schedules without any customization or risk assessment. Default settings are often generic and may not adequately address the specific risks associated with a sensitive production database or the particular regulatory landscape. This approach demonstrates a lack of proactive management and a failure to tailor security controls to the organization's unique environment and compliance obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and the specific compliance obligations related to the data being protected. This is followed by a thorough risk assessment of the asset in question, considering its criticality, the sensitivity of the data it holds, and potential threats. Next, evaluate the capabilities and limitations of the security tools, such as Symantec CCS 11X, including their configuration options and performance implications. Finally, make a decision that balances security requirements, regulatory compliance, and operational feasibility, documenting the rationale for the chosen configuration. This iterative process ensures that security controls are effective, efficient, and aligned with organizational objectives and legal mandates. Question 19. Comparative studies suggest that the most effective implementations of Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11X within regulated industries are those that proactively address specific compliance mandates. Considering an organization operating under U.S. federal regulations for financial data protection, which implementation approach would best ensure adherence to these mandates and minimize audit risks? Option A. Implement CCS using default configurations and industry-standard security best practices, with the expectation that these general measures will cover most regulatory obligations. Option B. Prioritize the deployment of CCS's vulnerability assessment and patch management modules to strengthen the overall security posture, assuming this will inherently satisfy regulatory requirements. Option C. Focus on integrating CCS with existing security tools and systems to centralize security event management, deferring detailed compliance mapping until after the initial deployment is complete. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable U.S. federal financial data protection regulations, map these requirements to specific CCS functionalities, and then configure the solution in a phased approach, starting with critical compliance areas. Correct answer is B. Prioritize the deployment of CCS's vulnerability assessment and patch management modules to strengthen the overall security posture, assuming this will inherently satisfy regulatory requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in large enterprises. Integrating a new security control solution, Symantec Control Compliance Suite, CCS 11X, into an existing, complex IT infrastructure. The challenge lies in ensuring that the implementation not only meets technical requirements, but also adheres to the specific regulatory and compliance mandates relevant to the organization's industry and operational jurisdiction. Without a thorough understanding of these mandates, the CCS deployment could inadvertently create compliance gaps, expose the organization to audit failures, or even lead to regulatory penalties. The pressure to deploy quickly can exacerbate this, leading to rushed decisions that overlook critical compliance considerations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased implementation strategy that prioritizes the identification and mapping of relevant compliance requirements to CCS functionalities. This begins with a comprehensive discovery of applicable regulations, e.g., PCI DSS, HIPAA, SOX, GDPR, depending on the organization's sector and location, assuming U.S. regulations for this exam context. Following this, a detailed assessment of the current IT environment is conducted to understand existing controls and potential gaps. CCS is then configured to align with these identified requirements, focusing on its ability to automate evidence collection, policy enforcement, and reporting. This methodical approach ensures that the deployment directly addresses compliance objectives, minimizes risks, and provides auditable proof of adherence. It represents best professional practice because it is proactive, risk-aware, and directly tied to the organization's legal and regulatory obligations, ensuring that the technology serves a strategic compliance purpose rather than just a technical one. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing CCS without a prior, detailed compliance requirements analysis is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach risks deploying a solution that does not adequately address the organization's specific compliance obligations, leading to potential audit failures and non-compliance penalties. It also fails to leverage the full capabilities of CCS for proactive risk management. Deploying CCS with a focus solely on technical security features, such as vulnerability scanning or patch management, without explicitly mapping these to compliance mandates, is another failure. While these features contribute to security, they do not guarantee compliance. Regulations often have specific requirements for reporting, data protection, or access controls that may not be directly addressed by generic security functions. This approach overlooks the compliance aspect of the CCS solution, treating it as a pure security tool. Configuring CCS based on industry best practices without validating against specific organizational regulatory obligations is also problematic. While industry best practices are valuable, they are not a substitute for legally mandated requirements. An organization may operate under a specific set of regulations that differ from general best practices, and failing to account for these specific mandates can lead to non-compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with implementing Symantec Control Compliance Suite 11 X must adopt a compliance-first mindset. The decision-making process should begin with a thorough understanding of the organization's regulatory landscape. This involves consulting with legal counsel, compliance officers, and internal audit teams to identify all applicable laws, regulations, and industry standards. Subsequently, the technical implementation team must translate these requirements into actionable configurations within CCS. This requires a collaborative approach, ensuring that technical capabilities are aligned with compliance objectives. Regular review and validation against compliance requirements throughout the implementation lifecycle and post-implementation are crucial to maintain an effective compliance posture. The focus should always be on demonstrating adherence to mandated controls and providing auditable evidence. Question 20. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood of a critical data breach due to an unpatched vulnerability in a legacy system, impacting customer personally identifiable information, PI. Given the system's critical nature and the potential for significant operational disruption, which of the following remediation strategies best balances security imperatives with business continuity requirements? Option A. Defer patching the vulnerability until a scheduled system maintenance window in 6 months, assuming the risk of a breach within that timeframe is acceptable. Option B. Develop and implement a phased remediation plan that includes immediate patching of the most critical vulnerabilities, alongside a long-term strategy for legacy system modernization or replacement, with thorough testing at each stage. Option C. Implement network segmentation to isolate the legacy system from the rest of the network, relying on this as the primary defense without addressing the underlying vulnerability. Option D. Immediately initiate a full system upgrade to the latest version, accepting potential short-term operational downtime as a necessary consequence of addressing the vulnerability. Correct answer is B. Develop and implement a phased remediation plan that includes immediate patching of the most critical vulnerabilities, alongside a long-term strategy for legacy system modernization or replacement, with thorough testing at each stage. Explanation: the risk matrix shows a high likelihood of a critical data breach due to an unpatched vulnerability in a legacy system, impacting customer personally identifiable information, PI. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate remediation efforts with the operational constraints of a critical legacy system, potentially impacting business continuity. The pressure to act quickly must be tempered by a thorough understanding of the potential consequences of any chosen remediation strategy, including the risk of introducing new vulnerabilities or causing system downtime. The correct approach involves a phased remediation plan that prioritizes patching the most critical vulnerabilities while developing a long-term strategy for the legacy system, such as migration or replacement. This approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of risk management and data protection mandated by relevant regulations. Specifically, it demonstrates due diligence in protecting sensitive data, a core requirement for compliance. By implementing a phased approach, the organization can mitigate immediate risks without jeopardizing essential business functions, thereby adhering to the spirit and letter of data protection laws that require reasonable security measures. This proactive and measured response minimizes the likelihood of a breach and its associated regulatory penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to immediately attempt a full system upgrade without adequate testing, risking significant downtime and operational disruption. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for maintaining business continuity, where possible, and could lead to a greater negative impact than the initial vulnerability. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the vulnerability due to the perceived difficulty of patching the legacy system. This directly violates the duty of care to protect sensitive data and would expose the organization to severe regulatory sanctions for negligence, as well as significant financial and reputational harm. A third incorrect approach would be to implement a workaround that does not fully address the vulnerability, such as relying solely on network segmentation without patching. While this might offer some temporary mitigation, it does not constitute a robust security posture and leaves the organization exposed to potential future attacks. Failing to meet the standard of reasonable security expected by regulators, professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough risk assessment, considering both the likelihood and impact of the identified vulnerability. This should be followed by an evaluation of potential remediation strategies, weighing their effectiveness, feasibility, cost, and impact on business operations. Collaboration with relevant stakeholders, including IT operations, legal, and business unit leaders, is crucial to ensure that the chosen strategy is comprehensive and aligned with organizational objectives and regulatory obligations. Continuous monitoring and reassessment of the risk landscape are also vital components of effective risk management.